Hello everyone, and welcome to the Genetec Tech Talk webinar on creating and managing security center alarms and incidents. My name is Derek Schaefer. I'm a technical training e-content specialist with Genetec, and I'm going to be your host for the webinar today. Today we also have Martina Dimitrova helping us out. She's one of the technical support engineers, and she's going to be helping with any questions and answers that you might have. If you need to ask anything, you can just type it in the questions box of the GoToWebinar console, and one of us will get back to you with an answer as soon as we can. If there is anything that we do need to look up any information for, we'll make a note of that, and we'll send you an answer as soon as we can. The question and answers and the video links and the slide deck will be posted in the GTAP forum after the webinar, so probably tomorrow. It's going to be in the section for this webinar, Creating and Managing Security Center Alarms and Incidents. And if you watch the video later, if you're watching this now, and you do have any questions, you can go ahead and post them there. After the webinar, if you have any questions, you can put them in there as well, and we'll be taking a look, and we can give you any answers if you need to there. Now, of course, this video is being recorded, like all the other videos, and that will be posted tomorrow in the GTAP as well. So if you need to view it, you can either download the file from here, or you can view a video using this icon right here. Now, the videos can also be viewed on our YouTube channel, so if you want to view it there, you can just go to YouTube, search for Genetec Training, and then we've got various playlists that you can take a look at, and you'll find this one under the GTAC Tech Talk webinars, as well as any previous videos as well, if you want to watch any previous GTAC Tech Talk webinars. And we've also got some how-to videos, some operator training videos, things like that on there. This, of course, you can view this from a browser, or you can view it from your mobile device as well. If you want to receive any notifications to video editions or any new documents or anything like that, you can do that from the GTAP. As you may have noticed, we've got a new design for the GTAP. It's very well laid out, and you can just go into your Edit Account section and go under Newsletters and Notifications. And you can either put a checkbox for the Beyond Innovation newsletter here, and you can also go down to the notifications, and you can put a check mark next to anything that you want to be alerted about anytime there's a change. Now you can set the frequency as well. This will have to be set to daily or weekly. If you do have it set to never, the options below here will be grayed out. And of course, if you do make any changes, don't forget to click on the Save button on the bottom here. As well, on our YouTube channel, you can always subscribe to the channel, and that way you will get notified anytime we post a new video on there. Okay, so taking a look at the agenda for today, it's fairly straightforward. We're going to take a look at configuring alarms first, so anything we need to do to set them up. We're going to take a look at responding to alarms, the different ways we can do that, and we're going to look at alarm reporting next, and then after that we're going to take a look at the incident creation and management. The incident creation, you also may see that referred to as tile recording. So that's a new feature with 5.3, and can be used as part of an alarm process here as well. The last two sections here, I'm actually going to do this live, so I'm going to bring up a security desk or a config tool, and I'm going to show you everything you need to see from there. Like the previous webinars, I do have this agenda on the side of the screen here on the right side, and we have a progress marker along here. That's not going to help much for the incident management since we're going to be mostly in the security desk for that. But if you do need to go back and watch the video later, or if you need to step away for a second, I know things happen, you can always come back and take a look at the side here, and this marker will show you what section we're in. Okay, so jumping right in, we're going to take a look at configuring alarms first. Now, when we talk about alarms, of course, traditionally when we think of alarms, we think of things like getting a hardware tampering alarm for a camera or something like that. a door held open too long alarm, or a door forced open alarm for a door, or something like a fire sensor or other input that's on a panel that can activate an alarm. That's what we traditionally think of. However, when we're looking at Security Center, we can really use alarms for any time that we want to notify the users in the security desk of any kind of system event. So it's very flexible. For example, if we get motion on for a camera, and that camera is set up in a location that's supposed to be blocked off and there shouldn't be anybody there, we can have that trigger an alarm, and that way the security operators know that there's someone somewhere that they're not supposed to be, and they can go and take care of that. And they can also manage who's going to go take care of that as well. Also, for instance, if we have any kind of system events on an archiver, such as disk full, that can pop up. We can get an alarm, and that means we know we need to notify somebody to go take a look at that before it becomes a serious issue. Or in the access control case, if we have, for instance, a manual station set up for a door, and usually you want the door to be an access point that's using a REX or using card access, and manual station is more for emergency purposes or if something's not working right. So really you want to be notified if somebody pulls that manual station. So this is also a good case where we'd use alarms, but not something that you traditionally think of like that. As well, the nice thing with alarms is that we can use them to actually track the responses to these events in the system. Through the alarm acknowledgement, we can see who acknowledges the alarm. So if there's something that happens, like the motion in a blocked off area, we can see who actually acknowledged that and is supposed to have taken a look into the problem, and that way we can follow up with them. And we can also use the report to see how often this actually happens. So maybe there needs to be more enhanced security around that area that we blocked off, instead of just some tape saying keep out kind of thing. As well, we can also associate entities with the alarm, so we can get more details immediately on that system event. So in the case of the motion on event, we'd of course associate the camera that got the motion event to this alarm. So when the alarm pops up in the monitoring task, in the alarm monitoring task, we're going to see that video right away, and the operator will be able to see, is there really somebody in there? Is that just a cat walking through or something like that? So that's really another thing that's very powerful with alarms here. So I'm going to give you a kind of ridiculous example here just to show the what you can use alarms for and the flexibility of them. So let's say, for instance, we have a coworker and his name is Mike, and Mike likes to go out on his lunch hour and take a nap in his car. Now, we like Mike and we don't want him to sleep too long and get fired. So what we're going to do is we can set up an alarm so that when Mike passes through the parking lot exit, so that's a side on a door, we can actually trigger an alarm. And there is actually a way that we can delay that as well using nested alarms. So that basically indicates to a coworker, you can have a set of trusted coworkers in there, that in 30 minutes we should go get Mike out of his car. One kind of cool thing we can do with this too is we can put details on the car model, his plate number, the color of the car, things like that, in what's known as a procedure. So when that alarm goes off, we also can get a procedure that pops up that'll give us that information. So as I mentioned, we can send this to multiple people. One of them will acknowledge it and say, yeah, I'll go get Mike. And then of course, go and actually take care of the not really the problem in this case, but go get Mike. As I mentioned, we can trigger other alarms to create time delays. So basically what you'd have is one alarm that's automatically acknowledged, and you have a 30-minute delay on it, and that acknowledgement, that 30-minute acknowledgement, when that comes in, you can use that acknowledgement as a system event to trigger the other alarm to let the actual operators know that it's time to go get Mike. So that's something pretty cool and pretty flexible in there. Again, silly example, but it just gives you a good idea of what we can actually do here. Just to show you that in more detail, this is again the mic example here, how that would actually be set up on the system, so to give you an idea of how it would work. So here's our, we've got a monitoring tile, and we get an access granted event. It's through the parking lot door, and it's from Mike. So what we can do is we set up an event to action, and we say that when we get an access granted from the parking lot door, we can actually specify the exit point here. And we want to say it's only for Mike. So if anybody else goes through, it's okay. We know they're not going to go take a nap, so we don't need to do anything about that. And of course, our action is to trigger an alarm. We have a specific alarm set up for that, wake up Mike. And we can put a schedule on this as well. So if Mike's going out to the parking lot at the end of the day, of course, we don't want everybody to be notified in 30 seconds or 30 minutes that it's coming up there. So we have a schedule for the lunch break, and so that way the alarm will be triggered from this action, and then somebody can actually click on the alarm, and they can click on the acknowledgement here. Okay. So let's take a look at the alarm creation. So basically we're doing this from the alarms task in the config tool. So we're going to be in the alarms section for it as well. And when you click on the add alarm button here, it's going to give you a new alarm in your alarm list. Then when we look over on the side, once we have that selected, we go to the identity, and the first thing we can do, of course, is rename it. We can give this a logical ID as well, and give it a description if we need to. The next step is to go into the alarm properties. The first thing we want to set up is the priority here. So the priority basically dictates what that alarm is going to do with respect to other alarms. So if you have your alarm monitoring task open and you have a lot of alarms in there, anything with a higher priority, which is basically a lower number here, so just think golf, lower is better, then that alarm is going to come up, and it's going to come up before one that has a lower priority. As well, of course, we need to add recipients, so we need to know who is going to be notified of this alarm. We can use users or user groups here, and if we do have multiple people selected, we can choose the broadcast mode, so we can choose to notify everybody at once, or we can choose sequential here, which will give us a list of times that we can use for each recipient. And I mentioned before about the attached entities. This is where we would add any cameras or doors or anything that we want to pop up in the tile with the alarm, be associated with the alarm when we're viewing it. Of course, you can add them, and if there's a lot of entities, you can go ahead and do a search. You can filter it on various types of entities here, whichever ones we want, and that way it's a lot easier to choose the relevant entities here. Now, when the alarm is activated and we do have a camera in there, we can choose what kind of video to display. Switch to the next tile here. So we can choose to either view live, we can choose playback, so if the alarm is triggered, we might want to go back from a certain time to start playing. We can choose both. We can choose, this is a new option here actually for 5.3, it's the still frames. So we can choose a combination of live video or still frames as well, or just the still frames, and when we choose that, we can actually specify how many frames to pick and their frequency. So just to give you a good idea of what's happening over the alarm period. And of course, if you do have multiple entities in there, we do have an option here to set the cycling time. So how long you want to view each one of these entities for. So if you have a camera in there that there are two cameras that are your primary cameras, and you know you're pretty much going to get everything from there, you may want to not pop between them too quickly, just so you can actually see what's going on. So you might want to bump that up to like 10 seconds or 15 seconds, and that would give you a good view of the situation. And of course, for the alarm, we do have the last tab here, the Advanced tab. And in there we can set the reactivation threshold, and what that is basically how long it has to wait before this alarm can be triggered again. So in the case of, for instance, the motion on from a camera, if somebody's walking through the scene and it's going to take them 15 seconds to walk through it, we don't want this reactivation threshold to be 5 seconds, because it's basically going to pop up the same alarm 3 times, and it's not going to help us really. It's just still one event and the one alarm for it, so we could increase that if we need to. Alarm procedure here is, I'm going to take a look at that in just a second, but that's we mentioned about setting up the information for Mike's car. We'll take a look at that in the next slide. Of course, the schedule for when the alarm can be active. So this is different than the schedule we saw in the event to action. This is basically when this alarm can be triggered. So you can specify that, and you can also, this is usually a plus, we can hit that, and we can add multiple schedules here if we need to as well. And of course here we have our automatic acknowledgement. So when an alarm is triggered, usually what you'd want to do is have an operator evaluate the alarm, evaluate the situation, and acknowledge it, and go take care of whatever's happening. But you could also use alarms just as for bookkeeping purposes, just to know when it's happening. And if you know you're not going to have any operators there overnight, for instance, or during the day, during a certain time period, you could set an automatic acknowledgement so that the alarm pops up on the screen, makes a note of it, and then it sets it to acknowledged after the number of seconds that we specify here. As well, what we can do, we're talking about incidents, and we're going to see that a little bit later on, but we can create an incident on this acknowledgement. Now obviously an incident is something that needs manual intervention, so you're going to need to go in and say what's happening and add some cameras to it and things like that. Obviously we can't have these two on at the same time, so if it's acknowledged automatically, it's just going to sit there with the incident on the screen, so that didn't make much sense. So if you turn on the create the incident here, it's going to turn off the automatic acknowledgement, or vice versa here. Now we can also set to record video automatically when we do have an alarm for any cameras that we have associated with that alarm, and we can also say how long we want to protect the video for. So if it's a camera that has a very short retention period, we might want to bump that up for any video that's associated with an alarm, because we know that's got something going on that we're going to need to take a look at later. Alright, I'd mentioned the alarm procedure just a minute ago. So if we turn that on, basically what we get here is a section to put in a URL, or even you can put a file path if you have a shared drive or something like that. And you can use this button to test it to see what's going to come up. But this is a good way to create a shared space where you can make web pages to tell operators or security guards how they should respond to a particular alarm. So you can have different file names obviously here, and so they can have a very detailed list of steps for what they need to do to respond to a particular alarm. So that's something that's very nice. And looking at the procedure from our Wake Up Mike alarm, from our example here, I mentioned that we did want to have this car information so we could go out and find his car and bang on the window or whatever. So this is how it would look in our actual alarm tile here. Okay, so our next subject we're going to look at is actually how to respond to alarms. So there's 3 ways that we can trigger alarms. Basically we can do this through the alarm task in the config tool. We can do this through an automatic action, so that can either be from an event to action like we saw previously, or we can also add them to threat levels. And the last way is to use a hot action security desk. So we're going to take a look at each one of these here. First of all, we're back in our alarm task here. We can just right click on an alarm, and we do have a trigger alarm function right here. So if you do have somebody who's working on the system and they need to test an alarm to make sure it gets through, they can just right click on it and do trigger alarm. Or if they highlight it and you look down at the bottom where we have our create button or delete button, we actually do have a trigger alarm button here as well. The next way that I mentioned is automatically, so we can do this through event to actions here, like I mentioned. To do that, we open a system task, we go under the general settings, and we go under actions. And then when we create an event to action, we have this new GUI window here, which lays things out super easy for you. It's really great. So in our camera case, we can say motion on. We can specify an entity, or we can say any entity, doesn't matter. And then, of course, we're doing trigger alarm, we're specifying the alarm. And as well, we can put an acknowledgement condition as well. And that's, we're going to take a look at that in just a few minutes. But that's basically something that has to be met before the alarm can be considered as taken care of. And we can also specify whether we need somebody to click on that acknowledgement before the alarm is considered to be done. And of course, this is our the actual schedule for the action, not for the alarm. The other automatic way I mentioned is through threat levels. So that's in the same section, in the general sections of the system task. We just go down to threat levels here. And once we have a threat level created, or if we want to edit one, for instance, we have a fire alarm activated one, we can just go ahead and add an action in here, and once again it's trigger alarm as the action. And for the arguments, we pick the alarm type, so fire alarm, and that way whenever this particular threat level is activated, part of that process in the activation options is going to be to trigger an alarm. We could also put one in the deactivation as well if we need to, just to basically tell everybody go back to your stations or something like that. So, moving on to the security desk, we're going to flip over here. We can look at our hot actions. So on the top of the in the taskbar here, you click on your hot actions, and we can either edit a hot action, we can add one to the list, and we can configure the action. Once again, it's trigger alarm. We can specify the alarm that we want to trigger, and of course give it a relevant description so that it shows up properly in the hot actions. And the other method we can do from here is we can just do a manual action. So this is something that's nice if we want to do it again and again. It's something we know the operators are going to be using, or yourself on your system. You can just go ahead and set this up like this, and you've got it either in the hot actions menu. You can just click on it and hit execute, or you can hit Control and F1. It gives you the shortcut right there. And the other option is to do a manual action, which is a one-shot. So it pops up this window, and you're going to do the trigger alarm and pick the alarm again. And when you hit OK, it's going to do that action, and then that's it. It's not being saved for future use. So that's a couple of ways we can do that here. And I want to touch on a couple of things in terms of the alarm behavior and how we can modify that. So from the options in the security desk, when you come up with the options menu that pops up, if you go down to alarms, you have several things you can set up, and this is on a security desk basis. So this is how the operator wants to see their alarms and things like that. Excuse me. For instance, when we get an alarm, we can specify that whether we want to bring security desk up in front of other windows. So it could be somebody who's not usually monitoring the system, but if there's an alarm, then we really need to get their attention, and that'll pop the security desk up in front. We could specify to play a sound, and if we wanted to repeat, we can do that too. And if we're actually in the security desk, we can say if we want to switch to the alarm monitoring task to override whatever they're doing at the moment. And then once we've handled the alarm and it's acknowledged, we can also say to go back to whatever they were doing just as a helpful workflow option here. Also, we're going to look at packing and unpacking alarms, and that refers to the entities that we associated to it. And we can also say whether we want to automatically unpack them. So do we want to see the camera cycling in a tile, or do we want to see them all individually? And of course, for an alarm, we have different types of responses, like acknowledgements or forwarding an alarm. And one of those is snooze, and we can actually set up the snooze time here, which is exactly as it implies. It's just like your alarm clock. You hit the snooze, and then in a minute, for example here, the alarm's going to pop back up and let you know that something's wrong there. And of course, for your users, the people that actually need to receive the alarms, the recipients, we need to go into the user privileges, and we need to make sure that they can actually handle these or see the alarms, whatever we want them to do, depending on their particular job in the system. So we're going to need to look under alarm management and give them access to the alarm monitoring task or the alarm reports task, or both, whichever, depending on what they're doing. And of course, under the actions, we do have our alarm section here, where we can specify whether we want them to be able to acknowledge alarms or forward alarms or snooze. Maybe we have a user and he's snoozing alarms all the time. It's like, well, okay, you're denied. We're not going to let you do that anymore. So you have some flexibility and some power here to set that up. Okay, so I just mentioned the packing and unpacking of alarms. Excuse me. In this example here, of course, we have our glass break alert coming up. That's our alarm, and we're viewing that in a tile. And if you see this little icon here, it basically means there's multiple entities that we can view for this particular alarm. So in this case, we do have the alarm triggered, and it's still packed. So all the entities are being shown; they're being cycled through. If we look on the bottom, we can actually see that we're showing still frames, and it's showing how far before the actual alarm that this was. So if we click on that here, we can actually see the entities that we have associated with this alarm, and they are broken up. So in this case, we have still frames and live video. So for each camera, it's got separate still frames and separate video. And from here, we can choose a particular one we want. So if it's cycling through them, and we see something really important in the storage room, and then it goes on to the parking lot, it's like, wait a minute, I need to go back and take a look at that. You can just click on the eye here and click on the camera that you want to see. This is where we have the unpack option, so we'll take a look at that in just a second. And we can also stop the cycling as well, so we can take over and do this manually instead of having it go through every entity in a set time period. So once we unpack an alarm, we're going to see that it's kind of small, but we can see it takes up the whole canvas space here. And from what we saw before, we know we've got four cameras, or four different types of viewing options here. So we had two cameras, and they're showing live video and still frames. And when it's unpacked, it's showing our two cameras with their live video. And this is showing the still frames, so it's going to be cycling through the still frames here. So this is a neat way, if you're investigating an alarm, you can just pop that open and you can see everything that's coming up, and that'll be really an easy way to view the whole situation. Now, of course, once you've unpacked everything, let's say you need to handle something else, well, we can repack things as well. So we still have that eye icon here. We can choose to pack the alarm, or we can use the same icon on the top right of one of the viewing tiles as well. And it's going to go back to what we saw originally, where it's going to be cycling through every single entity in a set time period. Okay, so I want to discover something that's there's two basic types of alarms. There's a simple alarm and there's an advanced alarm. So the advanced alarm is where we have an acknowledgement condition here. So we do that through the event to action, and what really needs to happen is whatever we're choosing as the entity type, we're going to need to have that go back to a certain state before we can acknowledge the alarm, or before it'll automatically be acknowledged. So this is where the user acknowledgement required comes into play. So for instance, we have this door open too long for the parking lot door. We trigger the alarm that the door is open too long, and our acknowledgement condition is that the door has to be closed. So with this checked, with user acknowledgement required, what will happen is somebody's going to hold the door open. It's going to go past the accepted time. We're going to get this alarm, and even if they close it, that'll satisfy the acknowledgement condition. But if we have this checked, we still need an operator or a user to go in and acknowledge that alarm to clear it. If we had this unchecked, then as soon as the door closed, that would actually acknowledge the alarm for us. So that's why it's called the acknowledgement condition, and not like just a clearing condition or something like that. So that's something that's very powerful. If we don't have this set up, we can have we can not use the acknowledgement condition, and then it's basically just like a simple alarm where the alarm is triggered, we look at it and we acknowledge it, and it doesn't care what's happening on the actual entity side of things. So taking a look at some of the entity types, this is just a sampling. You can find all of them in the administrator's guide. But there's only certain events that do have these acknowledgement conditions. So there's some that it just doesn't make sense to have that because there isn't a definitive state change. But for instance, something where we have an AC fail, we want to make sure that power is returned to the unit before we can acknowledge the alarm. We just saw door open too long. That's an obvious one, as well as door forced open. We want the door to close. Hardware tamper, we need to clear that tamper state. Intrusion detection area alarm activated, so obviously the alarm has to be deactivated. And we can do the same thing for something like a zone where we have it armed or disarmed. And of course something like a unit lost, we need the unit to come back online. And we'd also seen our manual station activated. We talked about that earlier, and that needs to go back to a regular state. So just looking at our example here that I brought up in the previous slide, so our event is door open too long. We have the door held open. That triggers the alarm, and then the acknowledgement condition we had set up is that the door must be in a closed state, and we can't acknowledge the alarm until that condition is met. So the door is closed, that's our event, and that means we can actually acknowledge that alarm. And as I mentioned, if we uncheck the acknowledgement box underneath, that could be used to clear the alarm, just the closing event itself. Okay, so there's I've been mentioning different kinds of acknowledgement here. We'll take a look at a full list in the next slide, but if we're in the alarm task or in the alarm report task, and we do click on an alarm, we will see the acknowledgement options underneath. If we have a procedure, we'll see it. This is for a basic alarm here. If we do have one that has that acknowledgement condition that we were just talking about activated, we can investigate it. So that means somebody is going to take charge and say, I'm going to take a look and try to fix that door or whatever, and get that closed, and they'll click on that, and as you can see, we've still got the alarm going, so the door is still open, which means we won't get these options for acknowledgement. Okay, so looking at all the types of acknowledgements here, our default acknowledgement is pretty basic. That's the one that people are going to be using 90% of the time. and that's basically saying, I recognize the alarm, I understand what's going on, and I'm going to look into it, so let's complete that, or the situation has been taken care of. If we do have a bunch of alarms going off for the same alarm type, we can force acknowledge that, so that basically you just go to the alarm, right click, and there's a force option here. So that's more if you've got a bunch of alarms going off for something that you know about, and you can just go in and clear those afterwards to put the system back in a normal state. We also have an alternate acknowledge. So what this is basically another way to give you a marker in the system for the acknowledgement state. In Security Center, it's not recognized any differently, really. It just shows it as an alternate acknowledge. But you can use that yourself when you're doing reports, so you can filter alarms based on it. And really, it's up to your organization to define what the alternate state is. For instance, if you have an alarm that could be triggered falsely, you could set that as a false alarm acknowledgement. So that way you could go in and you could search for anything done, any alarms that have been acknowledged using the alternate method, and then you'd know how many false alarms you had during a certain time period. Of course, forward, that means if you have an alarm on your screen but you think somebody else should take a look at it, if you're in the west wing of the building and the alarm is going off in the east wing, you could forward that to a security operator you know is over in the east wing, and when you do the forward, it's going to pop up a window that you can type in a message saying like, hey Frank, can you go check this out, or something like that, and so they know that it's coming in, and the reason for the forwarding as well. I mentioned the snooze previously, so that's something we have there to temporarily deactivate the alarm. And we saw earlier where we set the time for how long it'll snooze for. As well, we mentioned the show procedure, so this is where we can pop up that window like we saw for Mike's car information. And we just talked about the investigate for any advanced alarms that have an acknowledgement condition, and that's basically to flag it as being in process of handled by a certain user. Now, if we're looking at alarms being used in a multi-user system, so this is more typically, I think, what we'd see if we have a bunch of operators. There is a few things that we can do. So basically, within the recipients, we can assign multiple people here. If we do the sequential broadcast mode, we can put a forward delay here. Now this is the delay, the number of seconds after the triggering of the alarm, not after the notification of the previous recipient. So in this case, this recipient is going to be forwarded the alarm after 5 seconds. So he'll get it first, basically, and then after 5 seconds it'll move on to Tony, and 5 seconds after that it'll move on to the administrator's user group here. So there's 5 seconds between them, but this is from the actual alarm start, basically, the triggering state. Of course, we can define the alarm procedures. That helps, of course, in a multi-user system. If you have multiple people, you want to make sure that they all handle alarms in the same fashion. If there's any paperwork to do, you want to make sure they all do it the same way, and that can be put in that HTML page. So there's a lot of flexibility there and a lot of help you can give operators there. We can also set the acknowledgement conditions, so we can force somebody to get up and take a look at it. So if you have a very large organization, sometimes that can be a problem where lines get crossed and you don't know if actually somebody has gotten up to go check out the problem. And of course you can have procedures set up for when the alarm is activated. The operators can forward the alarm to each other, or they can investigate it. And as well, one thing that's really nice, this is another product of ours called Sepelia, and this can be used to really help with quick communication between your security operators. From Sepalia, we can click on the phone icon up here, and the operators can make calls from actually within Security Desk and talk to each other. And instead of typing messages or something like that, it'd be a very quick way to say, okay, who's up, who's going to go take a look at that, and check out that alarm and see what's going on in that no motion area that we're supposed to have. So that's something that's very nice that can be used. That's an extra option that can be added onto the Security Center system. All right, we're going to move on to take a look at alarm reporting real quick here. So basically, for alarm reports, you can take a look at any past alarms or any current alarms that you want to view, and that's an investigation task within the Security Desk. So basically, one nice thing that we can see from here before I jump into it is we can actually set up automatic report generation. So once we set up our report the way we want, we'll take a look at this in a second, we can save this task with the parameters we have set here, and we can put it in public tasks if we want everybody to be able to see it, or private if it's just for us. In this case, we want to see any alarms from the last day, and we'll call that 24-hour alarm report, for instance. And we're going to save that task. And then what we can do is we can go back into our system task, and we can go into our scheduled tasks section here. And we can create a new scheduled task. We'll give it a relevant name. So send alarm report every 24 hours. And then from the properties, we're going to make sure it's active first of all. By default, it is inactive. And then we set the recurrence. So in this case, we can say, okay, every day at 8 a.m., I want to email a report. The report is that one that we just saved, the 24-hour alarm report. And we can specify who that we want to actually send that to. So of course, these users will have to have email addresses set up in their properties. And we can choose the format as well, so PDF or an Excel spreadsheet. Okay, so I'm going to jump over into the Security Desk, and just to give you an idea what we can do from the alarm reports here. Okay, so I've already got the task pulled up here in the Security Desk. So from here, of course, we have a whole bunch of parameters that we can use to set this. So of course we can check or uncheck all the alarms. We can choose one specific one. If you want to see how often we have fire alarms and how often we have to go wake up Mike, we can check those. We can say who we want this to be acknowledged by. We can say when we want it acknowledged on. So that's one way of restricting the time. We can do it based on the acknowledgement, or we can do the time based on the triggered on here. So we can say within the last 1 day for the triggering. We can change that to any time we need here, or we can put a specific date as well. Of course, that's very flexible. And we can also search based on the state. So this is actually very flexible here. So we can look for only ones that have been acknowledged. So if we don't want to see any active ones, or if we want to see any that are under investigation right now, we can change the state to that. And we can choose the source as well. So we can choose which entity is triggering the alarm. And of course, there's other things like who it's being investigated by, and we can search based on the alarm priority as well. This is where I mentioned that alternate acknowledgement. So if we use the alternate acknowledgement in our example as a false alarm for our particular organization, we can go ahead and we can specify that here, and that way we're not getting all the regular acknowledgements or the forced acknowledge. So let's choose all the alarms. I'm just going to generate the report real quick. And we can see that we're only seeing the ones here. So in this case, this was a false alarm that was sent. maybe Mike wasn't going out for his nap after all. So that's something we can use here. So this is also very powerful here. I'm going to turn this off. And now once we get a full report, we get everything here. We can see the triggering event here. So if this was done manually, we can see that. Those were all done manually. I'm going to go a little farther down. We can see we had a door held open too long event, and that triggered our parking door open too long. And in this particular alarm, I had it configured so that the alarm would be acknowledged as soon as the door was closed again. So I had that acknowledgement condition set up to closed, and as soon as the door was closed, I can see it was acknowledged by, in this column here, and if it says service, that basically means that it was the acknowledgement condition was met, and nobody had to manually acknowledge that alarm. Other cases, we can see who actually acknowledged the alarm and who took care of it. So if we need to follow up with somebody on a particular, let's say, a glass break, we can go in and talk to Tony here and see what happened with that particular alarm at that time. So this is very flexible. It's something we can get a lot of information from. We can see when it was triggered, when it was acknowledged. So if there's a delay, you can see that there. If it took Tony too long to go out and check out the glass break and his officer's right next to it, well, you might want to follow up with him on that. So if we do have any particular cameras or video associated with it, we can actually just double click on the alarm, and that's going to bring up the associated video with that particular event here. So that's that particular alarm. We only had one camera associated to it. Otherwise, we would be able to see. Let's pull up one of the wake up mic ones, and from here we can see we have the procedure, and oops, I broke that link. Sorry. And we also have the alarm here. So this is where we can unpack it if we need to and things like that. So that's something that we can see here. And if it is actually an active alarm that's going on, we do have our functions that we can do on the side here. Our acknowledgements, our snoozing, our forwarding, things like that, if I happen to have the particular rights to do that. Okay, so that's the alarm report. It's very straightforward. We can also export the report or print it if we want to, and that will be any records that we see from the list that we have here. So that's pretty much it. I'm going to hop back to the slides here. And we're going to move on and take a look at our incident creation here. Now, for the incident creation, there's 4 ways basically that we can create an incident. The first thing we want to do, however, is we want to create categories. So this is a good way to start specifying what kind of incident we're looking into. So what happened and what does it fall under? So we can do that again through our system task under our general settings. You see we've got this incident category section here now. Now I've created a few here to basically just give a general idea of what we can use it for. So if there's an incident and we wanted to get all the video of an intruder, we could create an incident for that and put a whole bunch of video clips together and show the intruder going through the building or doing whatever it was that he was doing. Assault, that's very straightforward. Vandalism, loitering. And also put a false alarm one in here as well. So if in our alarm we actually have this create an incident on acknowledgement, we might want to put this false alarm because we do need to actually create the incident. It's forcing us. So there may not be anything to see, but we do need to make it anyways. So there's as I mentioned, there's 4 ways of actually creating this. In a tile, we can either click on the number, or we can start incident reporting from here. We can do this from our incidents task as well, which is where we follow up with the incidents and if we need to do any exporting. So from here we'll see the list, but we can actually add one here as well from scratch and just add all the information in that we need. I mentioned on using alarms as well. We can create the incident on acknowledgement. And the last way as well is in our tools. We do have a report an incident button here that you can use, and that'll basically pop it up just like we use the add button here. So I'm going to jump into the security desk again, and let's first of all take a look at creating the incident from monitoring task. So we can just do it right from here. I can do a start incident recording, and that'll basically turn the tile red. You'll see that, and anything that I drop in there, it's going to start taking note of what time was the start and finish of the video that I was watching. So if you have something that's actively going on right at the particular moment that you're watching, so one of your guards is monitoring the situation and sees somebody breaking in, he can start do the incident recording and basically tile recording, and drop cameras in that he sees are relevant as the person is going through the building, and then he's got that right at the end that he can share with whoever he needs to. Now, one thing I want to point out here is that obviously I've got nothing going on in my system here. That's intentional, of course. But on a regular system, if you've got a whole bunch of cameras or doors or whatever monitored, they're going to be popping up in the tiles as various events are coming in. So of course, if you're doing a tile recording, if you're doing an incident, you don't want this random access granted to pop up in the middle of your incident, right? So what we can do is go under monitor here, and you can say stop monitoring for this particular tile. That's going to turn the number black here. So that means that this one's clear. It's not going to receive any of the monitoring events from any of the entities, and we can use this one for our incident recording. We can also do that from the number, as I mentioned. So when that comes out, we'll see the tile turn red, and we can start dropping cameras in there and tracking our burglar or whatever is going on at the particular time. Now I'm going to switch over to another way we can do this, and that's through the archives task here. So it's very similar. We have our tile here, and we can do our start incident reporting. Now, of course, in the archives task, our canvas here is not going to be receiving entities popping up with events, so we don't need to worry about unmonitoring the particular tile. So when we start incident recording here, again, it turns red. And we can just go over to our cameras, and we can just pull them up. We can look for our archives here, and then we can drop a camera into the tile. There we go. And then it's going to start playing the video for basically as long as I want to show it. And then if I say, okay, that's what I wanted to see from here, if I see like a car coming in or something like that, and then I want to see somebody coming into the office, for instance. I know they're entering through the back, they're coming in through the storage room. I can go here, I can generate the report, and here's my archives for then, and I can look at a particular time when they came in, and I can see, oh, here's where they came in and they turned the lights on. So I'm going to drop this in here, and then that's going to show that video, and I can keep that going for as long as I want to. And when I'm done, let's say it's just these two that I wanted to see, I can click on it here, and I can do stop incident recording, and that's going to bring up our record an incident screen. So from here, this is why I wanted to show it to you live, because there are a few little things and I wanted to point them out to you here. So of course we need to give it a tile, and we can say delivery incoming, let's say. Pretend there was a truck coming in or something. And for the category, of course, this isn't an incident unless, let's say, the truck hit something. So, okay, we've got vandalism. And we'll say truck hit light post. So we need to go back, and we're going to need to take a look at this incident later on and possibly have the video available for insurance purposes, things like that. So references by default, since we had these cameras we were viewing, those are in the references. If I wanted to add anything else in there, I could do that as well. So basically you can pull any entity and drop it in there, and that'll be recorded as part of the incident. So let's say I'm going to look for a door. I knew that he was coming in through the parking lot door. So I'm going to add that as a reference. So if we need to see anything related to the door that the person came in through later on, we know that it's that particular door. Of course, we have our video sequences here. We can either view the time range or the thumbnails. The important thing about having the time range is, let's say I'm looking at this and I realize, oh, I pulled up the wrong video. The guy was coming in at 5 a.m. I can actually go in here and I can change the time. Let's put it a little bit before. So move the second hand, and we're going to say he showed up. Oops, it was smarter than me. Okay. So it's 4:54, and of course I don't want this video to end at 11. That's going to be huge. So I can just say, I can just type that in even if I want to, and that's 5 a.m. And it's giving me the length of the video here, and I realize, well, that's maybe not what I want to see here. Let's do 5:10, and that gives us a good length of video here. So from here, what we can do, we have our video sequences. If we realize this one's not relevant, I can delete it. If I realize this one's more relevant than this one, and this is what I want to see first when I play the incident back, I can change that in the priority list using the arrows on the side. I can also completely add a new camera if I want to and choose the time and date range from it. So that's something that's very flexible here. And of course I can either create the incident, or I have our drop down here, so I can choose to create and email that to somebody right away. Or I can create and export it as well. Another thing with the video here is I can choose to export the sequences right from here. So I click on the export button, it's telling me the video, it's telling me the time range and the length, and I'm going to give it a file name here, and we can choose the file format. So of course we've got the new G64X file format, so